Hello, welcome back to a new series of Gardener's World and the most glorious day here at Longmeadow. We've had a pretty good winter, really, done lots, and I'll show you that later. But right now, I'm just cutting back these limes because all winter, they've had this lovely glowing colour from the stems, but the buds are now fattening up and getting ready to break into leaf. So it's time to cut them back, and you could do this with dogwood or willow just as well. And that will provoke a new flush of shoots that carry the leaves of summer, and then next winter, they in turn will have that lovely colour. But cutting them back is a sure sign that spring is on its way.
I'll be joined this year by familiar faces who will be travelling around the country visiting our glorious gardens and sharing ideas and tips that they gather along the way. Few places are looking better than the winter garden at Wisley right now. Carol is there looking for the best planting combinations to light up even the darkest days.
In winter, what happens is that the light changes. The sun is low in the sky, and it creates this drama, especially first thing in the morning and late in the afternoon.
Over the next few weeks, Jo will be revealing tricks of the trade to make the most of small town gardens.
Those all-important garden design elements, such as layout, materials, planting, privacy, and finishing touches to help you get the most from your plot.
And we're also off to South Africa, which is home to many of our favourite garden plants, to see where they thrive in the wild.
We've had a fairly good winter here at Longmeadow. We've had frost and we've had rain, and often on the same day, but it hasn't stopped us getting on. And we've got on quite well. It all began here in the writing garden, which was okay last year, but didn't seem to be as good as it had been in its first year. And I put this down to lack of light. Things were growing and struggling to get enough light. So we cut the hedges right down, reduced them by half. Looked good. So we thought we'd do the next hedge, and then the next one. And in fact, we've reduced the height of the hedges right through the garden. And that's created as big a transformation as any in the last 10 years. As part of the changes, the orchard has had a makeover too. Fences have come down, and the apple trees have had a cosmetic prune to lift them up so we can see underneath. But now is exactly the right moment to prune any apple tree for best productivity. And when you're pruning an apple tree, the first thing is to understand how most apples produce their fruits, which is on spurs. This branch is about 4 or 5 years old, and coming off the side are these spurs. All the apples are produced on spurs like that. And if you look at last year's growth, you can see it's completely smooth, no spurs on it yet at all, so there'll definitely be no fruit on this year, and maybe not even next year. It takes about 2 to 3 to 4 years to produce fruit-bearing spurs. When you prune, it stimulates a massive growth. But that growth will be smooth, it won't have spurs, so there'll be no apples. So if you pruned every year, you'd have an awful lot of new growth and absolutely no apples at all. Now, this tree here has got 3 strong branches which are permanent, lots of space in between them, and I've pruned out any growth that comes in the middle. I was told when I was taught how to prune apples, imagine you've got a pigeon flying at the apple tree. You want to make it so that it can work its way through the middle of the tree without touching a branch. And that lets the light and the air in, and that helps with fungal problems, it helps with ripening, and is generally part of the apple's health. Now, if you take a tree like this is called Devonshire buckland. Now, you can see that the central stem, it's a semi-standard, is good, but a lot of these branches are in a mess. And the first thing to do is to remove any branches that are crossing, and you get them so they rub against each other, and you can get wounds forming, and that's where you get infection getting in. And the second thing is remove anything that's broken. If there's winter damage from storms, clean them off. Now that is the starting point. So I'm going to check this through, and straight away I can see I've got a branch here that shows it well. It's curving back on itself and rubbing against this branch behind. When you're making any cut, you want to make it slightly sloping so the water can run off, and also don't go right up flush against the joint that it's coming from. Leave a bit of a collar, because that will stop any disease getting back in. It's very important not to get too carried away with the cutting and stand back and have a look. But from up here, I can see I've untangled it. I've let in light and air, and the fruit will improve as well as the overall health of the tree. But all this work, and in fact all the work that we've done at Longmeadow over the last few months, is geared towards making the garden look better this spring and summer. But Carol has been to RHS Wisley to celebrate the way that it's looking right now.
In the depths of winter, our gardens can often be overlooked. Our sights are set expectantly on spring. Yet this time of year offers its own delights, an atmosphere unique to this season. Truly something to be celebrated. RHS Wisley is a world-famous garden that has a well-established winter garden. Here they're exploiting every element available, creating a spectacular display. There are all manner of cornus and willows planted here, providing absolutely glowing colour. You almost feel as though you could warm your hands on it. And it's all created by the bark of these various shrubs. At the end of each winter, the stems are cut right back hard onto these short little trunks. And that means that the new growth for them is full of energy and brilliant, brilliant colour. You can take inspiration from this sort of planting and bring those flaming colours into your own back garden. In winter, what happens is that the light changes. The sun is low in the sky, and it creates this drama, especially first thing in the morning and late in the afternoon. Here, not only have they placed things carefully so they take full advantage of that light, but also they've planted close to the water, so you get double for your money. Now, in this corner, the atmosphere is completely different. It's intimate. And as you walk along, you're suddenly aware of the most beautiful perfume, Hamamelis, with these beautiful spidery flowers. The tiny little flowers of Sarcococca Christmas box, viburnums with these bunches of tiny little bright pink flowers. Pollinating insects are few and far between at this time of the year, but they're going to make sure that those insects know exactly where they are by belting out this beautiful perfume. And as you bend down to sniff the perfume more closely, you're suddenly aware of this carpet of flowers, all these winter aconites and the promise of what's to come. The winter borders here at Wisley have recently been extended to offer even more inspiration. Deputy Curator Matt Pottage has been instrumental in their growth.
What we wanted to show in this bed is just sometimes structure, stem shapes. You've got these contorted hazels in here.
Yeah.
Now, they can be just as beautiful as something flowering.
I love the intricacy of this little, is it a sophora?
It is, it's for a little baby. You know, that's purely here because of that little zigzag stems, the small leaves. But, you know, why not have that in the winter garden? It's just as pretty. The lovely thing with these is you can still see all the irises through them. It is
see
quite...
everything through, yeah. They're very transparent. What other new ideas have you tried?
So some really funky planting, which I really love, are some thuyas. They've got these bizarre-looking, like, upturned mops or something. And then they've got this white rubus biflorus running through them. And also the thing I really want to show people is that if you've got a winter display, it can also be nice in the summer. You know, these corners are variegated. You've got the strange foliage of the contorted hazels. The Sephoras are really beautiful still in the summer.
Yeah,
so
and you could have summer bulbs all through here too, couldn't you, if you wanted to? It's not just for winter, but winter is such an important season, isn't it?
It is.
It's so neglected in the gardener's calendar. As this garden so clearly proves, winter can be the most exciting time. So don't wait till spring to get outside and see your garden. There's not a minute to lose. Go for it.
Carol is going to be visiting lots of glorious gardens throughout the series, and in particular this year, she's going to be unpicking the borders, seeing how plants have been combined and put together so that we can do that in our own gardens. Now, if you've got any photographs of your own garden in winter, then send them to us. We'd love to see them and we can share them on the programme. And you can get the details of where to send them from our website. Are you coming in? Come on then. Come on. Shut the door. This greenhouse has been filled with pelargoniums all winter. And actually, they've been very happy. It's heated just above about 5 degrees. They're hardly watered at all, bone dry, and they've come through really nicely. But it is important just to give them a little bit of attention now, just before they start to grow. We've got lots of different types, but they all need the same treatment. And the first thing to do is to cut them back hard. If we take one like this, which scented leaf, I'm pretty sure it's Lady Plymouth, although long lost its label. Lovely musty lemon leaf smell. Now you can see that's starting to get a little bit leggy. And the new growth, of course, will make it even more leggy. And what they respond well to is just given a good hard chop. So if I get in there and cut right back like that, you'll do no harm. It will respond well. I'll just cut that off. And what it'll do is keep the shape of the plant, but also reinvigorate it. Now, at this stage, that's enough. So we've reduced that right down, ready to have a flush of new growth and have more flowers. Now, this material here is potentially all good for cuttings. So when you do this pruning of your pelargoniums, have a polythene bag in your pocket. And then when you finish the job, they can be turned into cuttings for new plants that should be flowering by the end of the year. Now, the next thing to do is just check it over and pick off any dead leaves, and particularly the petals of any flowers. If you get petals or leaves falling and they get damp, they can carry botrytis, which is a mould, and these are plants that don't respond well to mould. So just snip off any dead material. Don't give them too much water, and certainly don't feed them yet. Start to feed them in about 2 months' time when they're really growing. And I suppose the key to growing any plant successfully is to know where it comes from, and then you can see what it does naturally. And we went to South Africa, which is the home of the pelargonium, to see them growing freely exactly where they thrive best.
South Africa contains a wide range of habitats. It has rugged coastlines, dramatic mountains, lush valleys, as well as subtropical forests. And some of our most loved plants that we grow in our British gardens have their roots deep in South African soil. So this is where to come and discover what makes them thrive. Now, one of these is the pelargonium, and it's a huge genus of plants with over 270 species. In the southwest of South Africa, summers are hot and dry and the winters are mild, and generally the rainfall is low. And over millennia, the pelargonium has adapted perfectly to the region's intense sunlight and parched soils, as well as the salt-laden winds that whip the coastline. Table Mountain is in the heart of pelargonium country, and on its slopes can be found Pelargonium cucullatum. This variety first reached Britain in the 17th century and is the parent of all the regal pelargoniums. Roger Oliver is a horticulturist who specialises in South Africa's many pelargonium species.
Pelargonium cucullatum is a truly amazing pelargonium species that can cope with a variety of different soil and terrain conditions. Here we have a bush that is growing just below Table Mountain, exposed to very harsh conditions during summer months. But the plant is quite adaptable. It has hairs on both sides of the leaves. And when the fog or the mist moves in, it captures all the moisture, and this helps to keep the plant cool, and it's another way for the plant to survive. However, in the summer, when it gets too hot, the plant stops flowering and seeds are being produced. And a nice aspect about pelargonium is the fact that the seed is equipped with a special coil, and that coil allows the seed to be wind dispersed, and then also that allows the seed to anchor into the soil. And this gives the plant a better opportunity to survive, and also good for germination.
Regal pelargoniums are hugely popular for both indoor and outdoor growing in the UK. But there is another species that has actually helped shape the way that we garden, and it's called Pelargonium peltatum. This is the parent of all our familiar ivy leaf varieties. Pelargonium peltatum is very at home in scrubland and will happily scramble and climb through trees and shrubs. They're semi-succulent and can be identified by their glossy ivy-shaped leaves. This succulent structure perfectly protects them from strong winds and also ensures their survival in periods of drought. And their trailing, sprawling habit and preference for free-draining, open compost makes them perfect hanging basket plants. A variety that prefers shadier areas is Pelargonium zonale, which is parent to the UK's most popular group of pelargoniums, the zonals.
Here we are with one of the most fascinating pelargoniums. This is the Pelargonium zonale, and something that will thrive in both sun as well as full shade. This particular species you'll mostly find on the margins of forests, or you'll find it growing in a ravine, and there it will be subjected to shade for most of the day, maybe exposed only to full sun for, say, 2 to 3 hours. It is more cool, and often the plant also experiences a prolonged flowering season. Normally, the zonal pelargonium has a very distinct black marking on the top side of the leaf, very, very broad leaf, almost in a heart shape, and it also have toothed margins. It is a very floriferous pelargonium, so it has flowers that are in a shape of an umbel, and also it has a distinctive aroma. It obviously enjoys water because you'll find that the species occurs in a rainfall region that are subjected to rainfall right throughout the year.
These 3 pelargonium species are amongst the most successful cultivated plants in the world. They not only thrive in their own niches, but as plant exports, they've colonized the planet, flourishing in gardens everywhere.
There is nothing like seeing a plant in its home to get a real feel of what makes it happy. Now, what makes me happy is to have new plants, so I want to take some cuttings from these And I've got some other jobs that you can be getting on with as well this weekend.
Pelargoniums take very easily as cuttings as long as you observe a couple of rules. Now, the first is to have a very free-draining compost. Prepare the cuttings so they're about 3 to 4 inches long and remove all the foliage except 1 or 2 leaves. Insert the cuttings around the edge of the pot. The second thing to remember is to water the compost, but not the plant, because if you get the plant too wet, there's a real risk of them rotting off before they strike. Put them somewhere warm, and they should take in about 3 to 4 weeks. Chitting seed potatoes is very simple, but it's important to do it if you want the earliest possible crop of new potatoes, and new potatoes come from first or second early varieties. All you have to do is place the seed potatoes on a seed tray or in egg boxes, and then put them somewhere frost-free and light. And over the next few weeks, they'll develop stubby shoots that will spring into action once they're planted into the ground. If you haven't done so already, it's time now to prune your autumn fruiting raspberries. These are the ones that produce their fruit on the current season's growth. So you can cut away all of last year's canes, cutting them hard right down to the ground. Then when you've finished, give them a thick mulch to keep them free of weeds.
A good mulch never does any harm at all, but for raspberries, it's extra important. They like cool, moist roots, and the mulch will keep the moisture in and keep the sun out. But also, they must be kept weed-free because they've got very shallow roots, and you can't hoe around them without damaging the raspberries. So put a really thick layer, and it can be old hay, as I've got here, it could be bark. I've even seen grass mowings used in a great heap around the roots, and that'll do them no harm at all and will keep the weeds at bay. Now, at the end of last summer, Joe Swift went visiting town gardens to gather together all the best hints and tips of how to make the most of those urban spaces.
Over the next few weeks, I'm going to be looking at different sizes and shapes of town gardens. And I'd like to give you some ideas for turning your own garden into a success. This week, I'm looking at a contemporary rectangular garden. This garden really draws you in with its balanced design and fabulous textural planting. Now, it's a long, thin plot, 36 metres long by 8.5 metres wide. But this contemporary design by Joanne Bernstein makes best use of all the available space. With a long, thin rectangular garden, a very simple technique which makes all the difference is just to create some movement across the garden. That's been done here using 2 offset paths that link between the various seating areas. This garden's southeast facing, which means this terrace where I am now gets the morning sun, and as the sun moves across the sky, the middle terrace will catch the afternoon and the evening sun. Perfect. With a third seating area at the shady end, we've got our 3 main destinations. And then this garden has added height and colour using large planting beds. You need to block off these areas visually by bringing the planting right across into the middle of the garden space, and then that's going to create that flow and draw you through. So here, for example, we've got these miscanthus grasses, which are nearer the house. They create a wonderful foreground, but at the same time, you see plants when you look out of the window rather than just the lawn. Then the last 2 areas are green lawns to create a contemporary layout, neatly formed, all of rectangles. In a small garden, the boundaries are really important. They'll set the style of the place. And in a town, they're the things that will help give your garden privacy. It's difficult to relax if you feel like you're being overlooked. And in a town or city garden, you've always got neighbours close by. But rather than building up the trellis and creating a fortress and lots of shade, think about the height of the screening and exactly where you want it. Because here, when I'm seated, this short piece of trellis blocks out windows from next door, so I feel perfectly secluded. And then here, it just steps down a little bit, it gets shorter and shorter, and then disappears altogether at the end of the garden. All the paving here is a natural smooth sandstone. The light-coloured stone lifts even the darker spaces and has lovely, clean, crisp edges. What it does is bring the garden together, just having that same material running through. And as a rule, I would only use a maximum of 2 surface materials, otherwise it just looks too fussy. And as you can see, 1 may be simple, but it's very effective. What works well with the planting here are the large beds, which have been laid out to be admired from all sides. What's clever is the seating area has been rotated 90 degrees, so I'm not looking back towards the house or towards the end of the garden, but looking straight out into this nice, generous bed of plants. This garden works hard to maximise all its planting opportunities, even in the trickiest spots. Town gardens often have deep, shady areas, but it doesn't mean you can't get some great plants into them. Here we've got brunnera and ferns combining, greening up that border. But even on the horizontal, the surface, you can green it up a little bit like a lawn. This is mind your own business. I love the zen-like qualities it brings to the garden. Now, it does come with a health warning because it can be a little bit invasive and spread into the borders, but it looks spot on here. The finishing touches, like pots and furnishing, can really set off your garden design. But the final flourish certainly worth considering is lighting. If you plan it from the start, you can stretch your enjoyment of the garden well into the evening. A few lights at the back of the garden, which is a shady space anyway, lighting up into the canopies of the trees and highlighting the trunks and their interesting bark, makes this a really inviting space. Somewhere you probably wouldn't bother coming at night, but with the lighting like this, you'd definitely come down here. This garden is a great example of how to make the maximum use of space. It's transformed this plot from just a rectangle to a plant-filled haven to enjoy by day or night.
Last winter, I stored as many good apples as I could, and we've still got lots. This is Blenheim orange, and we've been eating them all winter. And I intend to bake these. Core them, put them in the oven, bake them for about 30-40 minutes, and then you can just dip into that dish for the rest of the week. You can eat them hot, you can have them cold. I love them for breakfast. But that's it for this week. Don't forget to send us your pictures of your own winter garden. I'm going to show you some of the pictures that I've taken over the years here in midwinter at Longmeadow, and I'll see you all back here same time next week. Till then, bye-bye.